Conversations in Color. This is a free public cultural series created by the Amistad Research Center that features artists, educators, and community activists and talks about their work and its impact on social change. Tonight, we will experience a very spirited conversation by two powerhouses in the field of economics, Marc Morial and Dr. Julianne Malveaux, who will be introduced later this evening by President Michael Fitz. I just want to take a minute for a bit of housekeeping here tonight. We encourage you to engage in this conversation by tweeting, because we love Twitter, right? Also posting your thoughts on Facebook and asking questions during the Q&A at the close of the talk. I want to thank Tulane University and the Multicultural Affairs, the Office of Multicultural Affairs for their support of Amistad. Thank you, President Fitz, Tanya Tetlow, Carrie Stockwell, Barry Bronston, Carolyn Barber-Pierre, and Dr. Red Trimmel for making this program a reality. And now I am going to introduce our very special partner, Carolyn Barber-Pierre.
I'm Carolyn Barber-Pierre, the AVP for the Office of Multicultural Affairs, and I am delighted to introduce our president. Michael Fitz is our 15th president in Tulane's 183rd year history. In his 2.5 years, he has been passionate advocate of diversity and inclusion and moving this institution forward. President Fitz grew up in Philadelphia, went to Harvard and Yale Law, and clerked with Judge Leon Higginbotham. He worked in the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department, and when he became a law professor at Penn, was a national expert in separation of power issues. If he wasn't running Tulane right now, he'd probably be running all over the nation trying to make sense of what's going on, like the rest of us. He has served as the much beloved dean at Penn Law School for over 14 years before we persuaded him to come to New Orleans. And we are delighted to have him as our 15th president. President Michael.
Thank you, Carolyn. I have to start out by saying Carolyn has been an incredible figure at Tulane University. I won't mention the number of years, but this university wouldn't be where it is because of her, and alumni come back time and time again to talk about what she meant to them and to this university and what she means to us now. So let's give her a round of applause for what she does. By the way, I've been put under a lot of pressure in my life, but never have I been asked to make sense of what's going on right now in the United States. Luckily, my job precludes me from doing that, so I will stay away from that at the moment. Well, anyway, I want to welcome everyone and good evening. It's really wonderful to see everyone here, both from the university and the community, because of an event like this that really is so important to us here at Tulane University, as well as society at large. I want to quote our speaker, who once said, "The leadership of the mayor is crucial because it's the mayor that people will look to provide vision, energy, and a sense of confidence." Well, at its best, that's what a university is all about. The same for its students and for the community. It's an engine of opportunity, of equality and human progress, lighting the spark that ignites the light and the future of our society. And we really at our best and most important when we open up new dialogues and new conversations about our society. And I don't need to tell everyone here, we've never really experienced, at least in my memory, a society as torn asunder as it is at the moment. And I think for that reason, it's so imperative that conversations like this occur here and across this country. Now, These conversations, I have to underscore, uphold the ideals of what we are about at a university, and I speak about it all the time. It's these difficult conversations that really cause enlightenment, and more importantly in the end, cause education and progress. And that's what we're about, ways in which we can create progress across the nation. Well, I can't wait to hear from our speaker today, the current president and CEO of the National Urban League and the former mayor of New Orleans, Marc Morial. But before I begin, however, there are a few people I want to thank. First, Kara Olich, the executive director of Amistad, who is among the impresario of this incredible series that we're holding. And I have to say, that she, along with Carol and Barbara Pierre-Theo, have really been the force behind this event. Cara was the individual last time who oversaw the conversations with Charles Blow, which many of you may have been, which was really extraordinary. Tonight, however, Cara is taking a rest. She will not be the moderator. Instead, the honor will go to Dr. Julianne Malveaux, an economist, author, and a regular TV commentator, as we all know. She was the 15th president of Bennett College for Women and is currently the president and owner of the nonprofit Economic Education. As such, I really couldn't think of a better person to lead tonight's discussion on, and I quote, the future of race and economics, income equality, healthcare, and the affordable housing under the new administration. Now, our speaker, Marc Morial, is a man who in this city, needless to say, needs no introduction, but of course I'll do it anyway. It is clear he was always a man destined to public service. As we know, his father, Ernest Dutch Morial, cut his teeth in New Orleans, first as a lawyer fighting segregation. Later, he was elected New Orleans' first African-American mayor and redoubled the city's commitment to equality and opportunity for all of its citizens. Marc's mother, Sybil, who's with us, was an educator, activist, and a former member of Tulane's President's Council. Dutch and Sybil raised Marc, who at the ripe age of 36 was elected mayor of New Orleans in 1994. There he continued his father's policies of revitalizing the city. As mayor, he dramatically lowered the crime rate, and he also helped combat corruption at the NOPD. He also deserves credit, I have to say, which is particularly noteworthy this evening, for bringing NBA basketball to New Orleans. As many of you know, we are host, literally for the next few days, to the NBA All-Star Game. After leaving the mayor's office in 2002, Marc was selected as president and CEO of the National Urban League, one of the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization. And there, of course, he wasted little time, pioneered the historic $100 million 5-year Jobs Rebuild America initiative to create economic opportunity in cities throughout the nation. Marc Morial's career is a testament to the importance of public service, to the importance of having those conversations that can sometimes seem difficult to engage, but are so important. He started many of those conversations right here in New Orleans, and he's continued them nationally in his current role. We will never solve systemic racism, economic inequality, or any number of additional injustices and disparities without understanding their roots. And so it brings me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, a visionary nationally as well as in New Orleans, Marc Morial.
Hey, Mom. If it's not, I got mugged one time in New York, and they heard me 3 blocks away. So if my mic didn't work, it's all good. But we're both delighted to be here, and so many friends, we're not going to start naming them, but Sybil, Morial, because of you, I came this evening. They said, Sybil would like to see you. I said, okay, that works. They said, Marc, I said, and. They said, so we're, and Brother Norman Francis, you know how much I adore and respect you. He was my fearless leader when I was a college president. He really just really kept us all kind of in line. But basically, public policy, higher education, New Orleans has just basically nurtured so many great minds like yours and like Marc's. And Marc, this is a great opportunity. We talk all the time, but it's an opportunity to talk in front of lots of folks and to talk about some of the things that are very challenging in this particular time. The misfortune of the November election reminded me of the limitations of political action. Yes. Now, we know that political action is extremely important. We know how hard we fought for the right to vote. We know some of the struggles that your parents were involved in, and so many other people. But the election, for any number of reasons, including basically voter suppression, did not get the result that the popular vote, not the result that we wanted, but the result that the popular vote yielded. It occurs to me in that context that even as we talk about politics, we must talk about economics. Politics and economics have similar distribution principles. They deal with who gets what, when, where, and why. With economics, it's theoretically the invisible hand, if you will, or basically who's got the dollars. With politics, of course, it's who's got the power. And when we look at the African American community, what we see is that politics, frankly, has not necessarily improved the material conditions of African American people in the past 20 years. No legislation has closed the gap, the wealth gap. We still have an unemployment rate that is twice that for African Americans than it is for whites. We saw African Americans disproportionately lose their foothold on the housing market. And of course, the Urban League has parsed all this data and come up with this inequality gap or measure that you have, which is a very good measure. And folks should always just take a look at that when you produce that the first of the year. So how do we, what do we say if the goal is to close racial economic gaps and politics won't do it? How does it get done?
So first of all, thank you, Dr. Malveaux and Dr. Fitz and the Tulane University community. Thank you for giving me a reason to come home and eat my mama's gumbo and red beans. That's a good thing. That's a great thing, and it's a wonderful thing. And so I'm glad to be here. It's always positive and wonderful to be back home. And you asked a complex question, but I want to start this way, because one thing that we don't discuss is what would be the benefits to communities and the nation if we reduced the income gap or closed the wealth gap. Because many times people look at wealth and income as zero-sum gains. Anything you get means it was taken away from me. And that's really a short-sighted, narrow way to look at economics. So there's studies after studies and analysis after analysis which demonstrates the benefit for the nation at large, for communities at large, if you closed the income gap. And the benefit would be is that it would improve overall economic growth. Not to mention that it would play a large role in alleviating and healing many socioeconomic disparities. Chicago's in the news a lot today. Chicago's in the news because of its problems and challenges with violence. What people are not talking about in Chicago is that Chicago land has lost approximately 50,000 manufacturing jobs in the last decade alone. 50,000 manufacturing jobs. That Chicago today, as a result of the combination of that plus the recession, plus the foreclosure crisis, plus the abuses by banks, now has some 80,000 abandoned houses, many of them on the south and the west side. And black unemployment rates on paper in the 20% range, but in reality, more in the 40% range. It's a climate and a formula for all the most challenging social and economic problems. So I think it's important when we talk about this to recognize, one, that some of the deeper challenges that we face in America that hit the front pages related to violence and family challenges have economic underpinnings, significant economic underpinnings. And number two, that if we could alleviate some of these challenges, if we could address some of these challenges, the beneficiary of it would not simply be those that have been down underneath poverty or those that have been on a lower socioeconomic scale. Certainly, they would be beneficiaries and their qualities of life would improve. But it would improve the overall quality of life for the nation and the overall quality of life for communities. So here's the most startling, I think, interesting point. So if you look at the economics of the country since the 1960s, just think about the 1960s, 50 or so years ago. In 1963, the year of the March on Washington, sort of this pivotal moment in American history and sort of a pivotal moment before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act, before Johnson's war on poverty. The poverty rate for African Americans in the United States was 50%. The poverty rate for white Americans was 25%. By the time you got to the late 1970s, going into the 80s, before the Reagan years, that poverty rate amongst African Americans had almost been cut in half. The poverty rate for white Americans had been substantially reduced. So people step away and say, well, what happened? You did have a growing economy. It was the baby boom generation. But you had the Civil Rights Act in 1964. You had the Voting Rights Act in 1965. You had Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty, which brought Job Corps, which brought strength and financial support for education, which brought a whole new infrastructure. And the benefits were significant. We went through a period of time in this nation from the late 40s all the way through the late 70s, when the fortunes, the real incomes of every segment of the American population benchmarked against inflation increased. Bottom line, things got better for everyone. I would suggest to you that the public policies of the Great Society, I would suggest to you that the public policies of the New Deal, the public policies that put government's thumb on the scale to try to alleviate many of these challenges, paid a substantial difference. And then what happened? There was a backlash. Ronald Reagan was the embodiment of that backlash. So public policy can indeed make a difference. It can make a difference, but it's got to be combined with gestures of goodwill, strong leadership, and an intentionality to do it. Where we are, and I'm struck in America today at how the recovery that has occurred in this country has been so uneven. So if you look at the challenges of Chicago, the economic challenges of the South and the West Side of Chicago, ditto for St. Louis.
Don't forget Detroit.
Aspects of New Orleans. You know, you have large swaths of our communities that have not recovered from this recession, that have and continue to be left behind. Now, you know, some people call talking about this politically correct, right? I call it correct, right? And I call it real news. Because what I'm saying is the real deal of what people are experiencing. And the challenge is there the will to confront it? Is there the will to address it? I want to say something about the election, because you started with the election. And, you know, after the election, you know, it was a stunning and a shocking, if you will, result for many of us. But it also raises questions about this institution called the Electoral College. It really raises, if you were an outsider looking in, and someone said, this is the citadel of democracy, And they looked at the election results and said, how do you have a system where the person that got fewer votes can actually win the election? It's like formulaic, right? In my house, the distribution of weight between me and Michelle is like the Electoral College, right? I have more, but she has more votes, right? But I really think that we need to, it's important, because we've had 2 times, right? And no one ever thought about the Electoral College because you hadn't had this perverse outcome since the 1870s. Then you had it in 2000, then you had it in 2016. And I don't think the debate about the Electoral College should be dropped in this country, because I think it erodes confidence in the elections process. And it also, what it means is, and this is a political side of it, what it does is it's created a perversion in how people run for office. And that perversion is presidential candidates don't come to Louisiana, right? The last presidential candidate to spend any time in Louisiana was Bill Clinton, because the state was in play, right? If a state is not in play, the voters of that state will see no candidates. So it turns the race for the presidency into a race in 10 to 12 states where all the money gets spent. And let me tell you what you look at when you look at the data. The turnout in those 12 states is 10 to 12 points higher than the turnout in all the remaining states where candidates do not show up because they're either, given a red or given a blue designation. So we need to think through that it's not just about the perversion, but it's changed the elections process so that voters get ignored. And they get ignored because people pursue simply their resources and their efforts in contested states.
Let's stick with the Electoral College for a minute, because it is a conversation that needs to be had. That man in the White House, I have a hard time. I have a very hard time. I was calling him chump until somebody told me that was unprofessional. So I think we should just call him 45.
POTUS 45.
No, just 45. Don't even put the POTUS there. Just 45. People know what we mean. But he hadn't figured out that he won yet. Today he was...
Well, I'll tell you a story. I'm not going to name any names. When I got elected in 1994, I ran into someone else who won, who thought I didn't support them, even though they still won. And they came and tried to cuss me out. And I said, boy, I've heard of sore winners, but you're sore losers, but you're a sore winner. And I mean, that's really the idea, right? But, I think those that know Donald Trump say he craves this sort of affirmation and this popularity. The thing about politics and elected office, particularly at the highest level, no one will be universally loved. What goes with the territory is getting hit, getting criticized, getting challenged day in and day out. It's never going to be an environment where everyone is always praising you. And I think one of the risks for the country is when you elect someone to public office, when you give people the top job and they've never been in any other similar job. That's a risk for the country. The city did that with a mayor recently. They picked someone who had never been elected to office and then become puzzled when the behavior and the conduct is bizarre, right? When the approach is bizarre. You all know who I'm talking about.
I think I just figured it out.
Yeah, he's about ready to put his pajamas on and go to bed.
Okay, Mark, but
the reason why I'm making an analogy. I'm making a very important analogy. And the analogy is that electing people to president, to mayor, to governor, to give them awesome responsibilities, and they've never been in elected office, there is an incredible learning curve. I can tell you, being the mayor of a major American city, being the governor of a state is complex, difficult business. You can't run, you can't hide, you're not one of 7, you're not one of 3, you're not one of 100, you're not one of 435, you're one of 1. and the responsibility and the buck stops with you. And so I think this new president, right, is dealing with, the shock effect of the fact that you win, but like President Obama found out, just because you win doesn't mean your opponents go away. They don't lay down their sword. It's just that Obama was cool, calm, and collected and dealt with the pressure in a very different way. But his opponents drew a line on him on day one, refused to support any of his first-term initiatives, not the Affordable Care Act, not the stimulus program. None of his major initiatives were supported. So, but he dealt with it differently. This particular president is having a very difficult time dealing with the fact that you're going to be criticized and you're going to be challenged every day of your presidency. So one of the challenges of leadership to me is, can you take the heat? Dr. Francis, can you take a punch? Right? Can you take a rock? Do you know how to duck? Do you know how to dodge? And sometimes you might duck or dodge and still get hit. And you got to get back up and keep on fighting.
So back to the electoral college, because I wanted to deal with the origins of the electoral college and the extent to which the origins of, they're similar to the origins of this inequality gap that we continue to experience. The electoral college was created so that southern states could have representation from the enslaved people that they did not consider human, that they did not allow to vote, but they wanted to have some representation in any case. That's how we got the electoral college. And now we look at the roots of enslavement continue to rear their heads. John Conyers, again on January 3rd this year, introduced H.R. 40, which is the commission to study reparations for African Americans. Now they have put study reparations and add proposals and develop proposals, which gives it a little more heft. It's because we simply have never really looked at frontally the fact that the roots of economic inequality begin in enslavement, that we don't want to talk about that. Dr. King, in his closing speech, his last speech to the SCLC, said of the good things in life, the Negro has half, and of the bad things, the Negro has twice. And we can see that still with the unemployment rates and with any other. The numbers are not exactly the same, and it's not always half and twice, but the inequality still exists. So Mark, how do we inject this conversation about enslavement and inequality toward resolution? A lot of white folks say, well, I didn't have any slaves. No, you didn't. But you benefited from the institution of enslavement. Banking would not exist as we know it. There would not be bonds had there not been enslaved people who were basically used as collateral for the expansion of the Southern economy. So looking at that, it takes us away from our central point, but then again it doesn't. I keep saying I want someone to lock Chump in the basement of the National Museum on African American History and Culture. Just lock him in the basement, that part where if you've been to the museum, you must go. You start out in the slave ship. You start out in the slave castle. Just lock him in there. Leave him some KFC or whatever he eats. But let him sit there for a while and ponderate, and then he might be able to figure some of it out. But again, back to how we just talk about enslavement.
I want to just develop this so everyone will understand about the Electoral College, right? The Electoral College is very close to the 3/5 rule, right? And it's interesting, if you go look at the population numbers of all of the southern states, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, Maryland, and Delaware, right, which were all states that have slaves around the time of the founding of the nation. The number of slaves was either greater than or equivalent to the number of white persons in those states. So at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, the states of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Maryland concerned that if they agreed to an apportionment system based just on the number of white persons, then they would always be outvoted, because states like New York and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, which did not have the same type of system of slavery, would outvote them. So they made a deal. They said, we'll join in with you, but we have to be able to count our slaves. And the compromise was, count your slaves at 3/5 of a person, even though those people could not vote. And that was the deal struck. Then when it came time to how you would elect the President of the United States, they said, you know what? We're still going to be easily outvoted, right? So therefore, if you created the Electoral College, it took into account being able to count those 3/5 slaves, right, in the system of how you got elected, because each state has the number of electoral votes of the members of Congress plus the 2 members of the United States Senate. So this entire system, those who say it is a system designed to benefit small states miss the point that the small states at the founding of the Republic had a small number of white people, but a large number of slaves, a large number of black people. So these things are old remnants, and you kind of thought, because the Electoral College winner had only been misaligned with the popular vote winner once in over 125 years, that the Electoral College was a remnant. But I would suggest to you that the people who were behind, the forces behind the election of Donald Trump, have already set up their re-election organization. They did it on Inauguration Day. And what they're thinking of is, behind this 3 million to 5 million votes were illegally cast, is a scheme or an idea to launch a wide-scale voter suppression and voter intimidation effort. Let's conduct an investigation. Let's find irregularities. Let's come up with new laws that yet make it even more difficult for people to vote. There's a method behind some of this madness. This gentleman that works for Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, may be very sinister, but he's smart, right? He's smart. And they are thinking about these sorts of things each and every day, thinking ahead on a way in which they can win. Now, to your question about the issue of, race and economics, it's stubborn. I honestly ask myself time and time again, what can be done? One of the realities of Black America is also that in the post, I'll call it, civil rights, affirmative action, and beyond, we have created, there is a class divide within Black America. There are people like many of you in this audience who are college educated, who have secure jobs, who have achieved success. Here's the hard challenge. If you take a graduate from Harvard University, let's say 1980, if you took a white graduate of Harvard University in 1980 and a black graduate of Harvard University in 1980, and presume that on the day they graduated, they had the same personal balance sheet, the odds are that 25 years later, they would both be successful, but that the white person on average would have a higher net worth than the black person has on average, and that the overall average incomes would not be the same. So this issue of race is persistent, it's challenging, and it's going to continue to challenge America into its third century of existence, which is why I think it's important to discuss it. But it's also important to discuss it in this context. I sometimes, and we had this conversation recently, because I also think that when people think about urban issues or African American issues, they put a boundary around it, right? They say, okay, urban issues and African American issues are violence, criminal justice reform, police community relations, right? And I say yes, yes, and yes. But issues of concern to our community are trade, are economics, are the social safety net, are what health care looks like, what education policy looks like, what higher education policy looks like. I mean, all issues are issues of concern to our community. All issues are issues of concern that people need to be able to speak out on and to be able to work with. But, you know, Julianne, there's no easy solutions to this problem of the racial wealth gap in America, the income gap in America, and I think it's stubborn, and I think it's persistent, and until right now the politics of America are not aligned with a new effort to conduct a war on poverty, a new effort to confront this, but that is absolutely what we need in America.
I think you're absolutely right that we're not ready for that. In fact, there's this endangered species in American politics. It's called the moderate Republican. There was a time when there were moderate Republicans, when Republicans like a Nelson Rockefeller type person, what did they say? They were socially liberal and fiscally conservative. And so they didn't want to spend a lot of money, but they would spend some. Eisenhower spent billions on redoing the highway system. And we haven't redone the highway system again since
you know, people don't really, look, back in 1982, when the first Voting Rights Act extension was being debated, one of the most important people to breaking a logjam was Bob Dole, right? Bob Dole, who, on certain issues was one of those moderate Republicans, from the Midwest. And you're right, the moderate Republicans have really eroded. And those, many that have what I call moderate instincts, right, sometimes feel intimidated, right, and quieted because they don't want to be ostracized. Look, you just saw Betsy DeVos, right?
Betsy DeVos.
Get confirmed by one vote, and there were probably 5 to 6 additional Republican members who really wanted to vote against her confirmation for no other reason than her performance in her own confirmation hearing. But politics intervening, they didn't want to do it because they feared being challenged, from their base. That's the reality, of politics today. And
well, how big of a price is Susan Collins from Maine going to have to pay for crossing the aisle?
Those states are different. A state like Maine, if any of you all are from the Northeast, republicanism in places like Maine and places like New Jersey is different. For example, in a state like New Jersey, it's Republicans in New Jersey are more likely than not to be pro-choice. Republicans in New Jersey are more likely than not to have supported things like marriage equality. Republicans in New Jersey consider themselves racial moderates. Republicans in New York. Look, I live in that area now, and I hear some of these Republican guys talking, and I told one of them, I said, in Louisiana, you wouldn't even be a moderate Democrat, right? I mean, so the politics is different state by state. We simply have a system in our Congress, right, which affords, we have a winner-take-all system in the Congress. So if you get 51 out of 100 seats in the Senate, it gives you total power and control. You name all the committee chairs, you have a majority of the seats on the committees, you control the staff, you control the budget, you control the flow of legislation. The only thing the other side has is a limited use of the filibuster rule. In the United States House of Representatives, if you have 218 out of 435 seats, you control everything. We have a winner-take-all system. Now, none of that is written in the Constitution. None of that is written hard in the laws. That's the custom of our political system. And I ask myself, and I wonder if that is fundamentally the problem, right? Because you afford 100% of the power. Suppose you had a system where if you get 51% of the votes, you control 51% of the committees. And the other side controls 49% of the committee. Suppose you had a different system than the system you have today. So what this means is that ends up being why you have the gridlock and the deadlock system that you have today. And it also means that moderate Republicans, right? Moderate Republicans, the way hardball politics is played is if they want to break ranks, they've got to be able to take the risk that their colleagues might say, look, if you break ranks with us, we're going to strip you your committee assignment. We're not going to consider you for a favorable committee assignment. That's real politics, and that's what we're dealing with. And that thwarts the ability of legislation. So you don't have a free-flowing coalitions. One of the reasons why in my time in the 90s, when I served in the Louisiana legislature, you didn't have hard party line control. So you had a lot of free-flowing coalitions, right? You had coalitions made about specific pieces of legislation, you know, here and there. And that could occur because you didn't have Republican or Democratic control. It was more of an open system. It's not that way anymore in the Louisiana legislature, but that's the way it was back then.
I think it's that way anywhere. I mean, Republicans control 33 of the state legislatures, and again, I think most of them are playing real hardball politics around some of these issues. But one of the issues I want us to hit on, the League has done quite a bit of work on it, something that you're interested in, something that I'm interested in, which is entrepreneurial development in our community. Many people have said, expect that because 45 is the president, excuse me. Because 45 is the president, we can expect to see a reduction of regulation, which may well help the entrepreneurial community. What do you think? Will it help the entrepreneurial community, and will it help black business?
The conversation about the regulatory regime that people complain about is really something that doesn't directly affect most very small businesses. I mean, in America today, most African-American owned businesses have less than 5 employees. They're very, very small.
85% of them are sole
proprietorship. So they're very small. And so, you know, I always ask myself, what rules, what regulations, what regulatory relief could they be given? Well, what they really need is access to capital. But when you talk about regulatory relief, I'll tell you a story. You know, I had a meeting, and this is before the election, with a group of bankers, right? American Bankers Association, some of the trade associations represent banks. And the purpose of the conversation was to talk to them about lack of lending to small businesses and African-American businesses. And of course, the guy got on his horse, and he's talking about regulatory burdens and regulatory problems and challenges. And I sat and listened to him, and I said, okay, took out my pen. I took out my yellow pad. I said, okay, I want you to list in rank order the top 3 regulations that are giving your members the most problems. I could have heard a pin drop. He didn't have it figured out. He really had political talking points. And then he said, He said, looks at the other guy looks like these capital requirements. I said, man, after this bank meltdown, nobody's going to let you reduce your capital requirements. But
Trump will. That's what he's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the point of the matter is, if you really want to help small entrepreneurs, you'd really overhaul the SBA. If you really want to help small entrepreneurs, you'd give minority banks and community banks new tools to be able to lend. You'd open the window to private equity to more African American and small businesses in America. You would invest in what we do at the Urban League, right? We provide coaching and counseling classes that assist small businesses. We give people free consultants or free coaches. You would invest in those types of things. Let me tell you why we need to invest in that. You know, after the Berlin Wall fell, we invested a tremendous amount of taxpayer dollars in assisting the old Eastern Bloc countries in embracing free market capitalism. We made capital available, we made coaching available, we made consulting available through the Agency for International Development. We invested taxpayer dollars in helping grow, right, private sector enterprises in the old communist bloc, right? If we looked at our own inner city communities as emerging economies, and we invested in them with the same mindset, right, that we've invested in, quote, standing up free market capitalism abroad over the last 50 years, it would indeed make a difference. I think all too often, I've said to entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs, African-American entrepreneurs, they've got to get more politically active. They've got to get involved in the process. They've got to make demands. One of the things that I want everyone to note is that this year, 2017, is the 50th anniversary of the election of the first African-American mayor of a major American city. In 1967, both Cleveland and Gary, Indiana, Cleveland elected Carl Stokes, Gary elected Richard Hatcher. I just talked to Richard Hatcher by phone because I wanted to call him because we're going to recognize him at some point this year. A lot of the growth of minority businesses that took place, and most legendary is the work that someone like Maynard Jackson did, came as a result of public policy changes made in city governments and state legislatures, where the city as an enterprise decided, you know what, I'm going to make an effort to do more business with minority businesses, whether it's engineers, architects, road contractors, lawyers, consultants, and the like. So a lot of the growth in minority business enterprises that we saw in the 1970s and the 1980s came because of public policy interventions in city governments, and then state legislators brought that same ethic, that same mindset to state legislative initiatives. And in this town, it certainly, was the case, right? Beginning really with my father's administration. And I took it to a new level. And you all know I caught some hell over doing it, but let the record reflect I have no regrets, right? Because it made a difference in the lives of people. It put people to work. It built businesses, and it helped the overall health and vitality, of the community. So my real point is goes back. Politics makes a difference. Smart public policy makes a difference, right? It makes a difference. The big business community in America has put all their excitement over a Donald Trump regime, and many of them say this to me privately, is not that they're in love with Donald Trump, right? They're just praying and hoping and saying, Hail Marys, Our Fathers, and glory be to the fathers, for some kind of big tax cut, right? Or some relief, some regulatory relief. It's very agenda-driven. And it's agenda-driven because they're organized to try to push that agenda. Small businesses, minority businesses, women-owned businesses need to also push an agenda. Reform the SBA, right? Fix the SBA. Hold the banks more accountable to lend to small businesses. Invest in ensuring that every agency of the government is maximizing opportunities for small businesses. These are the agenda items that can make a difference.
When mayors like your dad, Dutch, and so many other mayors decided to use city dollars to generate opportunity for their own residents. And I think about Marion Barry in Washington, D.C. as an example, giving Bob Johnson a cable station that ended up turning into BET. Marion had the ability to do that, and so he did that. And people like to talk about Marion Barry, but that man really was about expanding economic opportunity for black people in Washington, D.C., and so many other mayors. But when this began to happen, what we saw was cases like Croson versus Richmond. We saw the white backlash of folks saying, you know, you're not going to let these black people essentially have opportunities that we think belong to us. I remember Maynard Jackson, his line was subcontract or no contract. So those folks who wanted to get large contracts from the city of Atlanta were forced to subcontract with minority business. And that's how many minority businesses were able to get their foot in the door. Once they have the subcontract opportunity, then they have the experience, and then they can come back again. But we got that backlash, and I don't think that we've successfully overcome much of that backlash. Too many people talk around, Mark, the issues of affirmative action and minority business set-asides, as opposed to saying the reason that we are going for these things is because the door was locked for so many years. The city and county of San Francisco did not give its first contract to a minority business until the late 1970s. Did not give its first contract. San Francisco, liberal San Francisco. But the fact is that there were people who already had a contract. So how do we, we get backlash. We got, Trump is backlash from Obama. Croson was backlash from affirmative action. How do we get past the backlash?
You know, I've come to realize that backlash is a given, right? There's going to be a backlash. The question is, can you be strong enough to withstand it? American politics is a pendulum. You know, it swings one way and it swings another way. And we have to continue to work to build, broader coalitions around why economic equity, right, is in the best interest of all. We cannot lose our focus. And I tell people all the time, like when I joined the National Urban League 10 years ago, the National Urban League was very much into economic issues, but it had never really been into entrepreneurship. And when I raised it, I remember several people on the staff said, what does entrepreneurship have to do with civil rights? What does entrepreneurship have to do with economic equality? And I said very simply that I looked at the staff that ran job training programs, and I said, we spent a lot of our time around here begging people to hire people, trying to connect people to various jobs. Why don't we get in the business of creating some jobs? Why don't we get in the business of creating some economic growth, right? These businesses, if these businesses can hire 2 people here, 3 people here, 5 people here. So it really, you talked about the mayors, right, of the 1970s and the 1980s. And one thing about all of them is that their teeth was cut. They had paid their dues in civil rights. Every single one of them. So by the time they got to city halls, right, they knew they had to be competent managers, but they didn't lose their instinct and their desire to push equity, to push social and economic equity as a part of their agenda. One of the things today is that the newest generation of elected officials, not just African American, but all elected officials have to be schooled and educated, right, on why it is important for them to fight for economic equity and economic justice. You want to deal with the challenges of violence in major American cities that everyone wants to do. You put people to work, and I can guarantee you it won't end the violence, but it will substantially reduce the violence, and one not need Brookings or Tulane University or Harvard or anyone to prove or tell you that. It's intuitive. It's common sense. And so we need an investment strategy for America's urban communities, and that is what I hope that every one of you in here can recognize. And we have to get beyond the zero-sum game mindset that hobbles us and hamstrings us as a people, where we think that if someone else gets something, it's because he or she took it away from me, right? She or she took it away from me, and not the theory of the large. We had an interesting discussion. I'll tell you this discussion in this community, right? There was a big discussion. 20 years ago, the city introduced its first land-based casino, right? in all fairness, when I was in the legislature, I did not vote for the project, right? Not because I was against gambling, because I did not like the provisions of the act. But then I got elected mayor, and I had to implement the project. And I had to implement it through 2 bankruptcies. A group of hotel owners who were opposed to the project came and said, well, if you open this casino, what you're going to do is you're going to take business, it's going to take business away from us. Why don't you let it go bankrupt? I said, have you ever heard of the theory of the increasing pie? I said, this company's a Fortune 500 company. Suppose they spend $5 million extra a year marketing the city as a destination. You might get some crumbs and some gravy from that, right? The theory of the opening pie. So I'm always, when we talk about economic policy, when people say we need economic growth, I say, yeah, but who does that economic growth benefit, right? Because you can't just have growth without policies that effectively ensure that the growth is shared. One of the realities of the recession in America, the recovery after the recession in America, is that the recovery and the income earned from the recovery, as you know, has been sucked up to the top. We've had redistribution of income in America. We've had redistribution of income from the bottom up to the top, and all the numbers show that.
Absolutely. We are going to, we're going to move to a transition to a question period. You closed up as we start out talking about economic justice and economic inequality. So we are open for questions, and I'm taking cues from these folks over here who are going to let me know how many questions we can take and how much time we have.
One of the few things that it's being spoken about, a possible area of compromise between the Democrats and Trump is infrastructure, investment in infrastructure, but it's being done in a pretty interesting way that apparently the Trump plan is to give tax breaks to corporations and to investors, which would end up creating not just that they will pick and choose which type of projects they want to invest in, so things that are needed but not profitable will not get the investment, but also that you will get things like toll roads and all sorts of things that will cost the citizens, money. And I'm wondering if there's a particularly how that affects low-income and minority people in terms of they're much needed jobs, but the effects of the result in the economy might hit them the hardest. So
I am impressed with you. You have really done your research. It's a really good question. You've done your research, and I think you hit the nail on the head. So POTUS 45, the president has, in his campaign, proposed generally a $1 trillion infrastructure initiative. Now, Hillary Clinton proposed a $250 billion infrastructure initiative. He proposed a $1 trillion infrastructure initiative. And as she said, his campaign plan was a plan to offer tax cuts to what I'll call private equity to invest in revenue-generating infrastructure. So what does that mean? In roads, it means toll roads. In water projects, it means add fees to the consumer and the user to pay off the investors in the project. I think that type of infrastructure initiative for us is a non-starter, right? Because not only do I not think it could pass, I think that those types of projects, that type of approach makes sense for a project here and a project there, for what I call boutique-style projects. A broad infrastructure initiative, the kind that we need now, is going to require an investment of public money. But here's the important trick people forget. When a city, a state, or the federal government builds a road or a building, who does the building? It's done by the private sector. Cities, states, and the federal government use private architects, private surveyors, private contractors, private dirt movers. Very few cities have, if you will, building departments that build anything. So the beneficiary of a big infrastructure program. So we need a big infrastructure program, but here's the conditions. We just wrote a letter to Chuck Schumer about this. It needs to have a number of things in it. Number one, we think if an infrastructure initiative is going to make sense, number one, it needs to not only finance roads and bridges and water projects, it needs to finance schools, community centers, health centers, libraries, and public facilities that exist and are the lifeblood of urban and suburban neighborhoods in America. That's condition number one. Condition number two is that there needs to be embedded into the infrastructure program an initiative to train people and put people, whether they're people who are re-entering society after being in jail, whether they are locked out and left out and dislocated youth, a plan to create job opportunities so that the jobs don't go to the same people only. And then the third thing is that we have to ensure that any infrastructure provision has built into it a specific commitment to ensure that minority-owned, women-owned, small businesses get a piece of the action. So there's a point at which there could be some compromise. But the two concepts, the one advanced by Donald Trump and the one advanced, I'll say, by the Democratic side right now are radically different. To me, if you want to build the American economy with a lot of jobs that cannot be outsourced or sent overseas, we could use a big, I'll call it New Deal style infrastructure initiative in this country. And I'm hopeful that there is a way that they might be able to come together on it, but they got to clear up this Russia thing first.
One of the things I think from a policy perspective that we have to look at, if we believe that closing the wealth gap and closing the income gap are national imperatives and national priorities, then any project like infrastructure development, anything has to be viewed through that lens.
Yes.
What does it do to the wealth gap? Does it widen the gap or does it close it? And so if you look at something that says, I'm going to give the money to my buddies who are then going to have essentially liens on bridges for 50 years. So we will, as citizens, be paying tolls, plus we already paid the folks the dollars, that widens the gap. So we just have to, I'm not saying that closing the gap is a priority for 45, but I'm saying that it has to be a national imperative and a priority for our nation.
Let me score a footnote on this for New Orleanians. One of the things that cushioned southeastern Louisiana from feeling the hard effects of the recession that took place in 2007, 8, 9, and 10 was the fact that you had the post-Katrina rebuilding taking place with, on the public side, money from FEMA, money from the federal government, and on the private side, insurance and philanthropic dollars. Look, almost every school building in New Orleans is new. That's because of that's because of FEMA, right? Because those schools were destroyed. That sort of cushioned New Orleans' unemployment rate didn't spike up in the depths of the recession the way it did in other parts of the nation because of what was happening with direct federal spending. The direct commitment of the federal government to this region was over $100 billion. I mean, it was a significant spend. Was it enough? No, Mississippi got more on a per capita basis. But it was a significant sum of money that helped to get the community so the effect of the recession was felt, but it wasn't felt in the same way it would have been felt but for that rebuilding effort.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
Good evening. I understand the president put out a new HBCU plan today, and I would be interested to hear what your comments
Did he
are.
put out a plan? I
heard that.
Really?
Yeah. It's supposed to be coming out.
No, he said he was going to come out with a plan. The HBCU presidents are supposed to be meeting with him.
28th.
Yeah, next week. So he, theoretically, at least two things are going to happen. One, theoretically, the White House initiative on HBCUs, which heretofore has been under the Department of Education, will be moved into the White House. So that's one commitment. The other commitment, theoretically, is that departments will be challenged to spend between 5 and 9% of their budget. The number keeps being bandied about, but between 5 and 9% of their budgets with contracts with HBCUs. Right now, the top 4 universities in this country get hundreds of millions, if not billions, and Brother Francis will know better than I do, but millions of billions, probably billions. But significant dollars go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, a couple other schools.
MIT, Stanford.
Oh yeah, I forgot about MIT. I guess I'm biased. And my undergrads, but I think we need it.
Dr. Fitz, we got to get Tulane in that number, right? we want the Tulane Xavier in that number, right?
But in any case, so those are the two things that I know about are likely to happen. Other than that, there's supposed to be all these other things happening, and the presidents are supposed to go and hear about it next week. So we shall see. During the campaign, actually, Mr. Trump did make a number of promises about HBCUs, and he had one of his little minions, the little peanut-headed Paris Denard. That was unprofessional, but accurate. He did a YouTube commercial that talked about how Mr. Trump was going to put all these monies into HBCUs, but there was never any specificity. And that's, I think, what people are waiting for now is the specificity. I think the other thing that we're waiting to hear, President Francis, is who will be the head of the White House initiative on HBCUs. The staff person, not necessarily the board person, but the staff person. Your colleague, Bill Harvey, is one of the slickest black men any of us will ever know. The man gets to be the head of the White House initiative under Republicans, then he switches up somehow and shilly-shallies around and becomes the head of the initiative under Democrats. But this is an advisory position. The question is who the staff person will be and what their motivation will be, and frankly, will they be an HBCU grad who's committed to HBCU? So we'll see what happens. I'm not super optimistic, but I'm told that Ms. Manigault is a triple HBCU graduate. I'm just asking Central State what they didn't do. But anyway, that's not nice. But it's the truth. But she apparently is quite committed, and we'll see what happens.
Yes, sir. As a serious student of the judicial system, I thought it was the height of disrespect to not even give Merrick Garland a hearing. I thought it was incredibly insulting to the president, then 44th president, and to Judge Garland to not even speak to him. But I'm curious to hear what you've heard about Neil Gorsuch and that process.
So I think, Judge, I agree that the way in which Merrick Garland was handled was highly disrespectful. But let me say this. It was a classic Mitch McConnell move, right? It was a classic Mitch McConnell move. And Mitch McConnell was prepared to gamble. And the reason why he was prepared to gamble, he was motivated by the fact that he did not want the Republican caucus to split. Because had Garland come to a vote, some would have voted for him and some would have voted against him. So he gambled. They drew a line in the sand. And then they made a somewhat intellectually dishonest argument. And that intellectually dishonest argument is that, we never filled the seat of a Supreme Court justice in the final year of a president's term, which is accurate unless you consider that there had never been the death of a sitting justice in the last year of a president's term since 1953, I believe. or there had not been the death of a sitting justice at all since 1953. So this was not one of these voluntary departures where someone was trying to game the system to give a president an appointment. This was the untimely death of Antonin Scalia that produced this vacancy. Gorsuch, to me, I think that in appointing Gorsuch, I think that he was nominated primarily because as a 10th Circuit judge, he comes from a circuit that has very few controversial constitutional cases. So he is, in many respects, like John Roberts, difficult to get your hands around how he would vote on certain issues, certain constitutional issues, because he's not written many decisions, right? But we are in the process, along with the Legal Defense Fund, the Lawyers Committee, a number, conducting a exhaustive background analysis of Judge Gorsuch's entire life and entire career to determine where he might stand on all sorts of issues. Now, this brings me shades of John Roberts. John Roberts, in his confirmation hearing 12 years ago, professed that he was going to be an umpire, that he was going to call balls and strikes, that he respected precedent, and then gave us two of the worst decisions. Now, he did vote for the Affordable Care Act, right? I'll give him that. But he is the architect of Citizens United, which opened the floodgates for unlimited money in political campaigns. He's the architect of the Shelby decision, which struck down Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act in a very, very, I think, weakly reasoned act of judicial fiat. So in Gorsuch, I have this sense that you have a very well-mannered, a very even-tempered, a very highly educated and erudite, scholarly judge who might, like John Roberts, right, be difficult to really pin down, but is really a deep originalist and conservative when it comes to these decisions. Now, what I believe is, I do believe that the Democratic caucus is poised to use the filibuster. And this is going to be a very interesting battle because the McConnell and induced push by Trump has threatened to eliminate the filibuster altogether, right? Or eliminate it for Supreme Court justices for which it was retained. This bears watching because the fact of the matter is because they slow walk the president's judicial nominees, right? The last 2 years of his term, President Trump has more vacancies to hypothetically fill than any incoming president in quite a long time. So this bears close watch. This bears civic engagement and activism, because as we know, these judicial decisions make a huge difference, right? A huge difference. And so it bears worth watching. Hey, it's been good to be with everyone tonight. I think we're being called.
I just want to welcome back to the stage President Fitz. If everyone could just stay with us for several more minutes. We have a wonderful presentation tonight that I know that you all would not want to miss. And at this time, I also would like to just have Deacon John also come up to the stage as well, and in preparation to set us off with some good spirits and good vibes.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you all. That was a marvelous discussion, extremely enlightening, and really, I think, showed off the better side of universities in public debate. But I have to say, it hasn't always been that way. There are moments when we really haven't shined as an institution here at Tulane. And I want to talk a little bit about that at this moment and do something very special, I think. In 1954, right after Brown versus Board of Education was handed down, ordering the desegregation of the nation's schools, Sybil, soon to be Sybil Morial, received a dare from her then boyfriend, Dutch Morial, that she should go apply to Tulane to see if they would let her in. She had just graduated from Boston University, where she was close friends with fellow student Martin Luther King. So she applied for graduate school, and at first was received with enthusiasm given her credentials. They told her first to start classes, and they would deal about that admissions thing a little bit later with the applications. 3 weeks of classes later, Sybil filled out the application with the dean, who asked for her race, something he couldn't quite tell by looking at her. She answered him, and he told her that Tulane could not accept a black student and asked her to leave. Undaunted, Sybil went next door to Loyola and had the same terrible experience. So she went on to an incredible career in life. To say she overcame these rejections would be a tremendous understatement. I can't list everything, but I'll name a few things right now. She went on to receive her master's degree back at Boston University. She served diligently as a school teacher in Newton, Massachusetts, in Baltimore, Maryland, and right here in New Orleans. She ascended the ladder and became the Associate Vice President for External Affairs at Xavier University. She was a passionate and respected activist and a prominent community leader. She's been recognized by countless organizations, including the National Council of Jewish Women, the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, the Lynx, and the Spectator's New Journal, to name a few. Sybil served tremendously on the President's Council of Tulane during the terms of President Amon Kelly and Scott Cowan. And in those roles, of course, providing incredible insight and help for us. And she provided strength, influence, and wisdom as First Lady to New Orleans Mayor Dutch Morial, and later as First Mother to her son, our Speaker, Mayor Marc Morial. Against all odds and with immense perseverance and will, she accomplished all that she set out to do and more. So I have to say, I'd like to be you when I grow up. Thank you, Sybil. But here's the thing. I haven't been able to stop thinking about how Tulane rejected her after all those years. When we learned that Marc would be coming to speak tonight, I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to, in a sense, to do the right thing, to remedy that wrong. And so I have to say, it is my genuine honor to present the resolution conferring on Sybil Haydel Morial the title of Honorary Tulane Alumna, with all the benefits and privileges of that.
Well, this is certainly a more joyful day than the day when the dean of the graduate school said, "I'm sorry." Of course, I knew that day would come. I knew when I went in. This was just 6 weeks after the Supreme Court decision. So nobody knew what the next steps were. But Dutch and I felt, well, you know, go and let them know what's coming. And that's why I came. It was a good week where the students accepted me, where one of the professors tried to find out what my background was. He didn't ask the right questions. He said, "Where did you get your college degree?" I said, Boston University. Had he asked where I had been to high school, I would have said, save your prep. And then he would have said, you're not welcome. But that was a joyful week because the students, I didn't know if they were New Orleanians or not, but one of them offered, he knew what my plight was, that I was waiting for my transcript to be wired from Boston University. Now, I need to say this too. I had come home from Boston. I had taken an accelerated course in the summertime, and of course when I came here it was late in June. And so when I decided to come to Boston, to Tulane to try it out, we said, let's see what they say. I knew that it would be short-lived. I was just waiting for the ball to drop. But one student loaned me his library card so I could get a book. Another student invited me to the cafeteria, and I knew that was a no-no because the law banned blacks and whites eating together or meeting together. And so I said, well, I won't come. But he persuaded me. I went in, I got stares. I don't look white, but it could be doubtful. They didn't want to challenge me and ask what I was. But I think the students learned something that week. Because after I left, I heard from one, and he said, well, we heard what happened. We're sorry about that. I said, well, I'm not sorry. We made one step. So this is, I truly appreciate this, Dr. Fitz and Tulane University for giving me this great honor, and I will cherish it.
It's not over because we're full of surprises here at Tulane and Amistad Research Center. So hit it.
Well, congratulations, Ms. Sybil. Who would have thought it that you and I getting put out of City Park about 70 years ago would end up being honored by so many people in so many wonderful ways. I used to walk through Tulane's campus and down the river in Audubon Park, and you were on the other side at Xavier Prep. But we have been good friends for at least 80 years that I will admit whether you admit it or not. And I thank you for your friendship. Your father delivered me into the world. And your mother and my mother played bridge with the Gloom Chasers. And somehow you and I survived, you in New Orleans and me making my way to Atlanta. And but there was enough of something in the water or in the gumbo that helped both of us to blossom. And I'm very, very proud to see your family and your grandchildren and my children and grandchildren. And I don't know that anybody could have imagined that we could have changed the world as much as we have, and as much as our children continue to make this place more available to more of God's children. Thank you for passing on the blessings and being a lifelong friend.
At this time, we're going to have one of our best friends to the Amistad Research Center, Deacon John, take us home.
But I'm afraid to
Somebody tell me, don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. And then I go to my brother, and I say, brother, help me, please. But he winds up knocking me back on my knees. Oh, every time when I thought I couldn't last so long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Hallelujah!
Thank you once again for coming, and thank you, Dr. Malveaux, and thank you, Marc Morial, for doing such an extraordinary job tonight.